Kenya is the second largest country in Africa to host refugees, and a large part of those refugees are actually from the queer community. The asylum seekers do this to avoid prosecution over their gender identity. However, there are now concerns that seeking asylum in Kenya has proven to be more discriminatory than some of the countries that these refugees actually come from. To help us get a clearer view on this, let's bring in Kate Pincock, who's a researcher at the Overseas Development Institute. Kate joins us via our video link from London, I believe. Kate, it's lovely to have you on the program. Thank you so much indeed for making time. I mean, help us better understand the dynamics here. Why would people who are refugees fleeing their country because of their gender identity go to a country that's got a reputation of prosecuting people who essentially are part of the queer community? In fact, I understand as you and I speak, Kenya's Human Rights Commission is calling for an investigation because of the murder of a non-binary lesbian 25-year-old there.
That's right, yes, and it's illustrative of not only the huge challenges that LGBTI people face in Kenya, but also the continued violence that is not being properly investigated. So for refugees, a large number of the queer refugees in Kenya are coming from countries like Uganda, Burundi, Rwanda, where it's also illegal, often punishable very violently in the law, to be LGBTI or to engage in homosexual activity with another person. But it's complicated. So the reasons that refugees would go to Kenya would in large part be to seek resettlement elsewhere, so looking for durable solutions. So whilst Kenya is a very hostile environment for LGBTI refugees, that is part of the reason that refugees go there, because it allows them to call on UNHCR for resettlement to third countries where they can live a better life.
And do you reckon that helps? And what I mean by that is, you know, it actually leads to material change in the kind of life they'll be able to lead versus the life they'd be living in their home countries?
So, I mean, again, it's very complicated, but in their home countries, when Ugandan LGBTI people are, come out as gay or realise that they are gay, they are targeted by the community, ostracised, victimised very violently often. Many of the young people that I spoke to when I was in Kenya had been attacked, had friends or family members murdered. So there is a real reason for fleeing to Kenya, often taking very long and dangerous journeys over the mountains to get into Kenya. But what they're met there, they're hoping to be met by UNHCR, an international body which provides protection and safety for all people based on their human rights. But what they find is a very delayed, slow process of determining their refugee status, which makes it very difficult to access services in the city. So in Nairobi, for example, where there are LGBTI serving organisations. So they end up going to places like Kakuma, which is a very large refugee camp, where they are sequestered in a protection zone for their own safety, but then are also identified by the community as being LGBTI, because people know that if you're Ugandan and you're a refugee in Kenya, it's probably because you're queer. And so that then again makes them vulnerable in a whole new way, because not only do they not have any resources from their own communities back home, so friends or family members which might help to protect them, they're also kind of very visible in their LGBTI status.
It becomes quite ironic at best, isn't it? I mean, the one space that's meant to be a safe space for you ends up endangering you. Are people landing up in Kenya more specifically because of a lack of alternatives? Because, I mean, it was also in 2019, the High Court in Kenya upholding a colonial-era law that actually banned consensual homosexual behavior. So even legally speaking, one can think of other places to go, potentially.
What's really interesting is that some of the refugees I spoke to were happy that this law had been upheld, because they felt that it made their situation more acute and more dangerous in Kenya, and therefore would increase their opportunities for resettlement elsewhere.
Wow.
So although at first glance it seems, counterintuitive to think that it would be good for this law to be upheld, for some refugees, they thought, this is good, we don't want this law to be changed. We want it to be dangerous here so that we have more chance of leaving. Because even if the law is not upheld, they knew that social discriminatory attitudes would continue, and the situation wouldn't change for them in a material sense.
It's not only in the refugee camp, obviously, that they face multiple threats. It's in the Kenyan society as well. I mean, I started our conversation by referencing this 25-year-old whose body was found in parts of Kenya. The details around her death are really shocking. How is that further complicating this issue for these refugees?
It's really difficult. I mean, Kenyan LGBTI organisations are incredible in the work that they do, but they are already very overstretched and have so many issues that are facing the local people, that to then ask them to also work on the very specific vulnerabilities that refugees face is a lot. So UNHCR, it really is the one that should be doing more here. But again, they're operating in a very constrained legal environment and must also work cooperatively with the government of Kenya. So you can see there's really no easy answers to this.
Yeah, absolutely. You have spent some time in part of these refugees that hold some people fleeing from Uganda, for instance. What have they been able to tell you about where they're hoping to go eventually? Is it a matter of, I just want to be safe, wherever that is? Or are you finding that there are specific countries they're hoping to land up in?
It is a matter of just wanting to be safe.
Yeah.
So when asking refugees where they would see themselves, where they'd hope to end up, often they speak about Europe rather than the United States, because there's definitely a perception, particularly during the Trump administration, that the United States was no longer a safe place. But some of them do mention Canada, some mention South Africa as well.
Sure. And the kind of solidarity that they're able to have within the refugee camp itself, I mean, there's something about having a common enemy, right? Even in a space where you're meant to feel safe. How much is that helping, if at all?
I think it's actually, to some degree, there are some tensions and splits within the LGBTI community in the refugee camps.
Wow.
Because of the difference in how they should pursue a strategy for survival. So some refugees are very vocal and very open about their LGBTI status, and they're very active in protesting and asking for their rights to be upheld by UNHCR. And then other refugees say that it's better for us to just live quietly, we don't want to be visible, we don't want to draw attention to ourselves. We just want to try and survive as best we can and hope that an opportunity will come for resettlement in the future. So although there is community, there are some tensions there.
That's really, really layered. Are you finding that there are instances where those who want to be overt about their sexual orientation end up outing those who'd rather be low-key?
Yes, there have been cases of this.
Wow. Okay. I'm not quite sure how to respond to that. I mean, and it does, I guess, draw into sharp focus conversations around how even within LGBTI community, within the community itself, I beg your pardon, there are sites of violence. And I think you know what I mean by that. Not sheer violence where people are bleeding, but you almost find that even within the community, there are instances where, ironically, the forms of oppression people are trying to escape are reproduced within the community itself.
Yeah, that's certainly the case. And you mentioned gender identity. There's a particular marginalization and misunderstanding of transgender refugees. There's almost a kind of an understanding of what it means to be gay, but to be transgender is something that's very poorly understood within Kenyan society, and again by UNHCR staff too. So the particular needs of transgender refugees are often very much overlooked.
Sure. Really is multi-layered. Kate, thanks very much indeed for helping us better place the complexities around the story. We appreciate your time. Kate Pincock is a researcher with Overseas Development Institute. Live to us there from London.